welcome to Dying to Live. It's the meeting of two Kristens.
Always a dangerous thing. The meeting of two Kristens.
Yes, only if we're lucky. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good today. Thanks for having me.
Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear. Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm excited to talk to you. We've known each other, of course, for a really long time, a decade plus. And gosh, I love the way that we met because when I moved to Seattle in 2004, I had a job that was deeply unfulfilling and I didn't really feel like I was contributing to anything. And I was in a new city all the way across the country from where I'd come from. And I really wanted to contribute and make a difference and meet people at the same time. And you had founded a not-for-profit at that point. I think with some other people or yourself and some other people came on
Nyla,
board.
yeah, Nyla Bitterman. Yep.
Yeah. And we met, I remember meeting you, having coffee in the mall of all places downtown and talking about how I could get involved with the Ruby Room. And so I was hoping you would talk a little bit about that because it gave me such hope and kept me out of a lot of loneliness. And of course it spurred our friendship, which has been going strong for a while now. So grateful for it.
Yeah. Well, we were so grateful for you. It's so funny because we needed marketing. We needed someone that had this eye to that, Oh, there's the dog. And it's so funny, right? Because you talk about how it was like so important for you in that moment. And I think those connections are like, it was so important for us in that moment. I feel like you walked away from, I remember, it's funny you say that. Now I'm remembering it sitting at that table. I think it was Pacific Place and feeling like, oh my God, did this just happen? Did this person just walk into our life? Did we act too desperate? Like we really need her.
Oh my gosh, really?
We were so excited. And I think because of just like your energy too, right? Like it wasn't just that you came with a set of skills, it was like the energy that you brought and who you were was such a good fit for what we were doing. And we just enjoyed it so much. It was it was kind of a lifeline for me a little bit at that point too, because I was in a weird place. Where was that? Like mid-20s, right? Trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I had bopped around. I had come out of college and was going to work in the movies. Like I was in film and started doing production work and then got really disenchanted with that whole scene and culture and then started substitute teaching and like doing odd jobs. I worked for my mom a little bit, doing development work in a nonprofit. Like I just was like, it was like a midlife crisis at 24 or whatever age I was. I was just trying to figure out what to do with myself.
You know what I love about that? You were like you were not afraid to say, I went to school for this one thing. This was my path. Well, you know what? That's not working for me. I don't know what it is, but it's not this. And I'm going to try this and I'm going to try that. And I'm going to do this without and maybe I don't want to make an assumption. Maybe the ego piece was in there saying, but you said you were going to do this and now you're not doing this. But talk a little bit about that. And then definitely want to get back to the review. Such a unique.
Yeah. I mean, yes. And I think, hindsight, right? Like in retrospect, you're like, oh yeah, that was really amazing. To be able to make that leap. In the moment, it was hard. It was sort of soul crushing. I'd come up as a kid doing theater and I was going to be an actress. And then I was like, no, I want to be behind the camera. I'm going to make movies and be a part of them. It was really crushing, to feel like it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, the glamour and what I took away from it really was that I was in love with storytelling. I was in love with going to the movies and being told a story, being brought into another world and exposed to new narratives and, all of that, but the actual making, the industry of filmmaking is its own thing entirely, right? Can be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Um, and I floundered. I mean, it wasn't a tidy process, right? As those times I think are never tidy processes necessarily. And I questioned a lot. And it really did feel like, when you talk about the ego, it did feel like um, there was a little bit of that feeling of like I was gonna, people had expectations of me. I guess that's the piece of it, is like taking apart what are the expectations that other people have of me. I was supposed to be the one that like made movies, that was going to make this thing to kind of untangle that piece of like, but what's really bringing me happiness, and how
Ooh,
do I step into something that feels more authentic to me, because this reality is not it.
ooh, 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 ooh. Okay, I love that, because that's like the crux of what I want to help people unearth in themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And right now, I'm working on my next little offering, which is about that feeling of home within yourself that you're talking
Mm,
about, and what is inside your home and what is outside your home. And it sounds, you're right, giant assumption earlier, it does sound so easy when you reflect back and say it like that, but there's all this stuff that entangles us into who we're
mm,
supposed to be in that life prescription that gets
right.
written for us at such an early age. So kudos to you for stopping, and even in the midst of all of that, like, ooh, suffering around it, being able to say, I'm going to go in a different direction, and I don't know what that is, and that's
Yeah. That actually is the theme of my life, Kristen.
okay.
Like
I feel that.
reaching, I'm right at the edge of like doing something, and then I'm like, ooh, no, this isn't my life. Let me, let me recalibrate. Like I'm in this constant, feels like your definition of like coming home is so apt, I think. It's like it's a constant coming into myself at every single phase. I feel like, and I've said this before to people too, like I feel like I'm living 9 lives. Like I feel like I'm a cat. I'm basically like moving through iterations of like, oh yeah, that was that life. It was my life, but it was like it was a totally different phase.
Do you, okay, so there's that, and then on the other side of it is people that never move outside of that life prescription, that
Mm,
stay cemented within it and don't see any other option and don't explore any other thing, and then there's a whole lot of stuff in the middle too. I'm For
yeah.
me, I could not stay. I stayed for a long time within that life prescription, and it epically was, was epically unfulfilling.
Hmm.
And then I couldn't, and then I got a taste of what maybe life would be outside of that prescription, and I couldn't unknow what I had started to know.
Right.
And from there, then I moved closer to what you just described for yourself. And gosh, for me, it's preferable to keep
Yeah.
keep reinventing and keep putting yourself in that cocoon and turning to goo and then coming out a totally different thing. I think that's great. It's totally okay. It's also really hard.
It is really hard. I think I wouldn't say it gets easier, but I feel like the process itself begins to feel like home. Do you know what I mean? Like you what you said, I think, is so true, that once it's like any work. It's like the anti-racism work, that many of us are engaged in more deeply now. It's like, oh my God, now that I know, I can't unknow. I can't just go back to being blind, allowing the systems to blind me, allowing myself to be blinded in this.
Yeah.
I can't. And I think the pain comes when you put yourself back in the box. That's such a greater pain.
Yeah. It's good. And the other piece of it, the familiarity with the little bits of evolution, that becomes like the recliner in your living room. And you're
Hmm.
like, ooh, you've been around for a while. I've sat in you a lot. You're kind of stinky, but you're the recliner, and I'm just going to go back in you for a while, which
Yeah.
is preferable to the super uncomfortable fancy couch
Right.
that never gets sat on anymore.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we've certainly veered. Let's come
Yeah.
back. Talk. And we knew this would happen.
I know. It always happens.
Okay, so back when I met you, the Ruby Room was
Yeah.
a not-for-profit. Tell a little bit about it because then I want us to go into just kind of your whole one of your major evolutions of life, which is all about philanthropy, but in a different way than people are going to be thinking. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, it kind of is a little bit tied into some of that goo time that I had, right? The floundering time one of the things I did was work at this school, and I was substitute teaching. It was like middle school girls kind of. And I just was like, oh my God, like the energy in young women is so awesome. And I had not, you grow up and you move into with your peers into your own phase of life. And it's like I hadn't had connection with that age in a long time. So that kind of stuck with me, and I really was interested in rites of passage and how generations of women can stay connected to each other. Like how do we stay connected throughout life, with different stages, I guess, different stages of womanhood. And so um, when I was kind of looking to figure out, I was getting involved, I was applying for a master's program, and I knew I wanted to work with young women. I didn't know in what capacity. And a friend of mine actually forwarded me a link to the similar kind of program that was happening, I think, in Chicago or something, where women were bringing together prom dresses and setting up boutiques and bringing in girls that couldn't afford a dress to come in through the boutique with a personal shopper. Can't remember the name of that organization, but there were lots of them. This model was not original, I would say, right? So she said, this would be kind of cool for you. And so, you know, as again, all of my stories go, I feel like I was a bit naive in what it would take. I was like, yeah, sure. I put out a call. That's how Nyla and I connected. She's like, I want to do something like this too. Thank God, it's so much more fun to do stuff like this in partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think it's kind of imperative to our future that we do this stuff in partnership. And we put out, I can't remember, it was like in the PI, the Seattle Times or the PI or something. And they posted my actual phone number, like my phone number to get in touch. And I lived in a 500 square foot apartment on Queen Anne, and dresses started coming in. I had dresses over the back of my couch. My phone was ringing. I had to change my outgoing call of like, and if you're calling for the Ruby Room, it was just like, I described it as like, it's a train that's moving and I'm just trying to decide how I can hold on. It wanted to happen, basically.
Yeah.
It wanted to exist. And then Nyla and I were just the container for like, how do we help this thing get its legs under it and exist? Yeah.
Have you read Big Magic?
Yes.
And so the idea
Yeah.
will find you,
Yeah.
and if you don't do something with it, it'll go to
Yep.
another place.
Absolutely.
Oh, that
Absolutely.
idea wanted you.
I've been thinking about that. Well, we'll wait. I'll talk about this later. I'll veer us into a whole like other conversation about like consciousness, how the consciousness exists, right? I've been thinking about that again of like, there's this entity that we exist in and we're just poked holes. We're just manifestations of that energy. So of course the consciousness would come through one place or another place, just like fabric, right? And so
Oh my God, my whole body just lit up in really painful goosebumps, which is a really beautiful thing. So validating. Yes, I love that.
painful goosebumps, the best. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it felt like that. It felt like that before I had the words for it, really. It was just like, oh my God, I either have to decide I want to be a part of shepherding this thing or not, but it has got its own life. And I would say that feeling, that trajectory, and this is before I was married or had kids, like that was also really clear that there was a trajectory of me ushering something in and holding it for what I had to give to it, and then the transition of letting it go and letting it become something that was not necessarily it didn't do exactly what I thought it would do, but it did what it was going to do. It was held by other people, and I had to also kind of release it. I had to just say, okay, well, I did my part in birthing this thing into the world, and now it's its own thing, and I can let go and let it exist or flounder or do whatever it needs to do without me.
I mean, that's
And
huge. And I
yeah,
remember that point in time. and thinking about you, like how this is her baby, for lack of a better word, and how does she have the capacity to just so freely let it go? And so I think that speaks volumes to who you are, the work that you've done with yourself, how you exist in the world in this collective consciousness, to understand that sometimes our role is not to hold it close to our chest, but
Yeah.
to be with it for a while and let it go so it can continue to evolve, kind of like us.
Yeah. And that's actually been a big tension in my life, because I feel I'm realizing like, oh, I have a role of sort of instigator. Like I have a role of like, I love to pull the ideas together and the people together and help push it into the world. And then I'm not really as interested in the day-to-day running of it. And the I don't know if it's cultural or if it's whatever, there's a feeling that I have sometimes of being a flake, right? Where it's like, oh, and then you just walked away from it. Like you didn't want to see it all the way through to completion, or you didn't want to manage it day to day.
Ooh,
And
that's very puritanical.
yes, right. And so that's kind of new for me to really get to a place to say, it's okay actually to have a role in something and not be the one that has all the roles. Like I don't need to, there are other people. And so how, again, you go back to partnership and community, it's like it's okay that and it's okay to say, to kind of become clear about what is your role in these things. And now again, looking back in retrospect, I can see this pattern of like, oh, okay, things that I've helped kick off have gone on without me. Sometimes not the way I fully envisioned them to go, but they exist, and I move into another place where I can help do something else.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you done any, did we talk about this before? Have you done any human design? Do you know human design?
A little bit.
I'm going to send you a link later.
Yes.
I really want you to take this quiz. No
Yeah.
pressure. But my guess is that you're a generator or a manifesting
Uh-huh.
generator, in which
Uh-huh.
case this makes perfect sense. You're not meant to be the shepherd of the day-to-day details. You birth the things, and then they have a life, and you get to go birth the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's quite honestly, like that's where I find joy. You know, I love the generating of ideas and bringing people together, and then like poof, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not interested anymore.
Love. We need those people. I'm the same way. I don't want to do the day-to-day details either, but I want to birth all the things. All the
Yes.
things.
Yeah, all the things. I know.
So there's this common theme too about women being
Yeah.
in service,
Yeah.
a greater awareness of how we exist in the world around us. And I think that all of those things kind of come together in the path that you've taken around feminist philanthropy and philanthropy kind of in general. And I'd really love you to talk a little bit about that, because your take on philanthropy is not what most people think when they think philanthropy. Like, I think some people hear that word and they're like, oh, okay, they're talk about giving money, but that's not what this is about at all.
Yeah. I was holding a session once, and I was asking people like, what's your definition? And like, give me a visual of what a philanthropist is. And someone was like, tweed pants.
Sweet bands.
Tweed pants.
No thanks.
Yes. Little stuffy philanthropy. Yeah. Again, I think it kind of grew out of this place of watching this community of women come together and like, we want to give dresses away. And then talking to people, and I should say in amongst that, I got my master's degree. I started working at a community foundation. I was working with donors and working with nonprofits and kind of being a bridge between, I was kind of getting the whole context of like what this world was of giving and receiving. And I was thinking a lot about conversations I was having with my own friends who would say things like, oh, I just volunteer at my kid's school, or, I just give a couple $100 here and there. I'm not, what is that? That's like a donor. I'm a donor. And I was like, no, you're a philanthropist. Like philanthropy is about how we love humanity. So that means everything you do, everything you bring to making the world a better place, whatever that looks like for you, that's your philanthropy. And I don't know. I feel like that kind of was a light bulb for people. And one of my retreats, and I talk about this in my book too, like one of my retreats I found so interesting. There was a woman there who I should say my sister-in-law actually, who was talking about working in the volleyball courts. And she was the whole weekend, she'd been like, I don't have time. I'm a single mom. I don't have time for this philanthropy thing. Like, what is it that I have to give? I don't have the resources. And then in one of the conversations, she started talking about how she would show up every weekend to like tend to these volleyball courts. She played volleyball too. So it was self-serving. And that was kind of the point of it, is that we started laughing about the fact that just because it makes us feel good, just because it's something that we're doing for ourselves, doesn't mean it's not something we're giving to
Right.
the world as well. Other people were benefiting from that. That's a really small example, but that's what I found so often in talking to women, is they were like, but I enjoy being with my kids. So that's not philanthropy. I enjoy showing up at volunteering every Sunday at my church or whatever, so it's not really philanthropy. I'm like, why do we associate? It's got to be painful. Like, there's always something good about stretch giving, like, really think about what this gets into another component, which is really think about, what do you actually need? What can you actually give away? If I've got 3 coats and there's someone on the street that is cold, am I really wearing all 3 coats? Or can I give, this is very sort of technical ways to look at that. But it doesn't have to be painful in order for it to be philanthropy. And to your earlier point, like, it doesn't have to be money. We associate this resource as being the only resource we have is money, which buys us into this whole vision of our current economy, which is extractive. It's not an economy that co-creates with people, which I think is really what we're moving toward. And I think philanthropy is primed to be a driver of that conversation of how do we live in a space. You think about like what mutual aid is doing right now. When you talk about solidarity, when you talk about, this isn't just I'm giving to someone because I somehow turned out better in life so I can give these things away. It's how are we creating a shared narrative that I'm actually impacted by the ills of the world. I'm impacted by these systems that are broken and really hurting other people and maybe not impacting me as much. And so how am I putting myself in the picture? I am a part of this and I'm going to benefit from it too. Not that that's the driver, I'm not doing it in order to benefit. It's such a tricky, I often will say too, like, it's like trying to explain meditation to people sometimes. I feel like, you're like, I'm like, do you see it? Do you see it?
Let me try it this way. But I think the reframing that you've done, and we should mention, and you can give the name of it at the end, but you've actually written a book on this because it's such an important nugget of reframing, in that philanthropy doesn't equal cash. It can, right, certainly, and there's a great place for that, but time, energy, attention, and here's a little nugget, self-work, the work we do on ourselves that ends up benefiting our communities because of the awareness that we raise, because of the things we deconstruct, because of how we're able to then show up in ways we weren't before. That is all philanthropy too. What a fucking concept.
Right. And I that self-work piece has become so important the last couple of years, particularly around philanthropy. And we're seeing that more and more, right? It's like, if you are not aware of this sort of the traits of white supremacy, and I'm a white woman and I'm speaking from that place, but like, if I'm not aware of those traits of white supremacy that exist inside of me, then I am bringing that to everything I do. And so that's another reflection piece. I go back to the Ruby Room and I'm like, oof, oh, there was a little saviorism steeped up in all of that stuff. There was, all of those pieces, and you can only, again, what you know, and then you do better, right? So, but being able to reflect back and say, okay, this journey has actually been a slow unraveling up to this point to better understand how I'm showing up is actually the most important part of this, because I can't undo these systems if I'm showing up entrenched in the systems. I have to at least understand how they're playing me.
Yeah. And then all of the micro systems and communities that we live within in our day to day, whether it's our kids' schools, our work
Yep.
situation, our families. That's
Yep.
a big juicy one.
It's huge. It's huge. As part of my process this last couple of years, I took the it's Okun Jones and Okun's Traits of White Supremacy document, and I journaled on each of those traits, how they show up in my parenting, which was fascinating, right? Because that's the most that's like, let's take it down to the studs here, like, let's figure out, like, how is this showing up really in my house? You want to talk about my house? Like, this is showing up in my house, and how am I raising my boys in a way that they are able to step outside? Now I'm inverting your metaphor, but like, how do they step outside of the house, right? Like, how do they know that this is this is not the way to be? And how do I reflect on it and be transparent about it? Like, oh, that's my perfectionism. You know what? That is not about you at all. That's about how I was groomed to uphold the system. These are the conversations we have in our house. Like, oh, let me just back that up and try that again with you, because I want you to see a different way of whatever it might be, baking. I don't want you to have the same tightness around perfection and the product over process that I was taught. And so, yeah, I think it's important to see how it shows up in yourself, and then what are those ripples out? How does it show up in your friends and your family relationships? How does it show up at your work, in any of the communities that you have outside of your friends and family, and then take it globally? I think that's part of the issue that philanthropy has had, is that we want to take it out to the world globally before we've started inside. It has to ripple out.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that is so right on. That is so right on. Or else it's embedded with often truly unintentional consequences that actually counter the work we're trying to do and what we're trying to give.
Right. I was just reading this morning Heather Cox Richardson's email updates on government and stuff, and she was talking about Biden's recent speech, and she was saying how he was talking about how we are bringing democracy to the world, and he's kind of reverting back to Theodore Roosevelt, how he instituted a new deal, a new plan, and I was waiting for it in reading through her thing. And at the end, she said, and the most important thing the United States can do now is actually figure out how to bring true democracy to ourselves first before we take it out to the world. And I was like, oh my God.
I can see you just cheering at your computer.
Those are the big systems, right? And it's an illness that is not just in us individually. It is in our country. It is in our policies that we've taken out globally that we are not applying at home, right? So it's when my master's degree was all in systems design and systems theory, and you're looking at all these systems, like my body is a system, my family is a system. We're all embedded systems, right? And so if you take care of one of those systems, you're going to find those patterns in all the other systems and will impact.
And actually, that's a great way to break it down for people, because this work is overwhelming, because intrinsically, maybe not intrinsically, that's a giant assumption as well. I think once we start to unravel it, we see how big it actually is and how embedded in our own personal threads and all the threads of all the systems and all the things. And it can get really overwhelming really fast, which I think can stop people from wanting to explore further. But if we just take one of those things and, arguably that has to be ourselves first. Right. If that's what we do, that's something meaningful.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think a lot of people, in some ways, and I'll go back to just sort of like, white feminism and me as a white woman, and, it becomes easier to skip over that work and then take it outside, take it out. I'm going to help other people.
Right.
That's my purpose, or that's my, and to be fair, I think that's how, there's historical baggage here of how white women were groomed to do that. This is what we were given to have control over this space. You know, you can help people. And so we have a lot of stock in that. We hold that as our self-worth. And so being able to acknowledge it, and I think really excavate that out of ourselves in order to show up in a more authentic way is huge. And it's really necessary if we're going to actually dismantle these systems. We have to be. And it's not, I would also caution and say, you know, it's not a first this then that. It's happening, it has to be happening kind of at the same time. You know, it's the cyclical action reflection cycle. You know, you're doing the work outside. You can't just, we're not monks. We're not going to just hole up and say, well, we got to figure ourselves out. It's not that kind of spirituality. It's a doing it out in the world at the same time that you're doing your personal work.
Yeah, it's concurrent, because to your point earlier when we were talking about what you can't unknow once you know it, once you unravel something within yourself, you're going to see the ripple effect of where that exists outside of yourself. And so suddenly now you're down this path about those things, and then you circle back to yourself and you see the next thing, and then you see how that ripples out. And so it's kind of this ebb and flow of how that works.
Yeah.
We could talk about anti-racism work and all the things. Oh God.
I know. I know.
Need to meet again, but I want to talk about something you're currently going through and have navigated in this super special time already that is this pandemic. And I want to give you a lot of kudos for being so brave to talk about it right now, because there's a lot of people that need to hear you put a voice to this. And so you want to share about what you've been going through?
Yeah. So last November 2019, so that's not last November, that's the November before last November, I lost all my hair. I developed alopecia universalis, which is losing the hair all over your body. And I had the privilege of having a father who had gone through it in his 40s. So I knew it, right? So it wasn't like this shocking, am I dying, clumps of hair coming out in the shower. I was aware of what it was, and I knew immediately what was happening, and was able to, immediately go to a dermatologist and say, like, I have alopecia. What do I do? What's the expert advice? And there is no expert advice at this point. It's a complete mystery. It's an autoimmune disease. It's where the body, autoimmune is when the body attacks itself. Alopecia is when the body attacks your hair follicles. It was shocking in that it happened over the course of about 2 weeks. All of it came out. So it was rapid. Sometimes it can come in clumps and then it grows back. And that's part of it too, is that it can grow back, but it can grow back in weird ways. It can grow back patchy. So yeah, it was a weird liminal time of like being a shocker at the same time that I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is. Like it almost was I would say a release, because I had lost patches before and they'd always grown back. And I'd always had in my head, like, oh God, please don't let me have alopecia. And then when it fell out and I started really digging in and doing research, I realized I'd always had alopecia. It was just humming in the background. And so to actually meet this thing that you're dreading so much and pass through to the other side of it was kind of a like, well, fuck, it happened. It happened. Here we are. Great. Finally, I can just move on. It's the thing that I was the most scared of, for me personally, happened. The thing that I've been worried about happened. And so now what? So it is kind of we talk about just like all the little deaths in our life, the things that we lose that we have to process and move through, that's all in preparation for eventual death and moving into eventual wherever we move. And it very much felt like that to me, like a dying away of this person I had built up to this point, that I had to have, there was an excavation happening internally to me. And it felt like, whether it was my body or the universe or what, it just felt like, okay, this thing that's been happening inside of you, now the rest of the world is going to have to see. This is forcing you to show the world. You can't hide. I mean, you can wear a wig, you can draw on your eyebrows, you can quote unquote try to hide. But I found the hiding to actually be grosser to me. It's like going back in the box, actually. It's very much, it felt like I'm trying to put, this beautiful thing has just happened inside of me that's expressing itself on the outside of me. And I'm trying to put that back in the box. I'm trying to put her back in the box by putting it back together, right? Now, I will say, it's not as easy as that, because I'm sitting here wearing a wig. Like, I haven't gotten quite as bold as I've seen a lot of women. And I'm so thankful to the so many women on Instagram that I started following and seeing them living their lives so fiercely, just so gorgeously themselves out in the world. And I'm not quite there yet. But I knew from the very beginning that that was my goal, that I wanted to show up. I knew that it was going to be a process and a journey to get there. And actually, I would say, my husband said one of the most important things to me at one point, because I probably about 6 months in, I was like, God, I wish I was brave enough. I wish I could just do this. I wish I could just go outside bald and just be me. And he said, it's been 6 months. Give yourself a break. You're working on it. You're working there. Don't worry about it. You do what you need to do right now, and that will be different 6 months from now.
Yeah.
And
that is gorgeous. I mean,
Yeah.
the way that he showed up for you in that moment. And, self-care and the way that we hold ourselves and parent ourselves through these things, it's not just hot baths and candles. Sometimes it might look like drawing on your eyebrows and putting on a wig until you are ready. And just like everything else in your life, you're going to know when that moment comes.
Yeah. That trusting, that knowing. And actually, that's been kind of the new thing I've been writing about, is that, like, what I was so amazed about, and I'm thinking about this because I just have been writing about this, but you hear, like, when something happens where you're suffering, you'll notice who shows up and who doesn't, right? And that was very clear to me. There were people who showed up, who said the right thing, who sent beautiful scarves to wrap around my head, like, people that showed up. But also, they're the people that I allowed in, right? Like, those people can't show up if you don't let them, number one. And number two, what I was amazed about is who I told. Like, there were some people I told that I didn't know that well. I just would be in conversation and I'd be able to tell them. And there were other people I knew really well that I was like, oh, no, I don't want to tell this person. And getting to trust that piece. I don't have to share myself and everything I'm going through with everybody. It's not their right to know everything. And it's not me being secretive. It's me being private. It's my life. It's my information to share with who I want to share with. And so, but the trusting of who that was when they showed up, and it wasn't always the people I thought it would be, but it was always the right people.
Yeah. And you trusted your intuition around who was safe and who was not, and who deserved that information, and who it wasn't for. And we do get to make that choice. And that doesn't mean that we're withholding. It doesn't mean that we don't value people. It means that some people get this information and some people get that information. And ultimately, that's boundaries.
Right. It's all boundary work. That's my other theme.
Oh yeah, me too. Still working on that one.
Yeah. Well, I think most people are probably, right. And yeah, it's interesting. I think, and I reflect too, I'm very lucky, I think, to have 3 very important men in my life, my 2 boys and my husband, but my youngest has been clear with me from the very beginning about how he just thinks I'm beautiful. He thinks I'm amazing. He doesn't care. He comes up and over the back of the couch and kisses me on the top of my bald head. And, he was the first one to be like, Mom, like, I don't understand why it matters. You're still the same person. You're still the same person. Why would anyone care if you have hair or not? It's like such a simple 8-year-old thing. I'm like, you're right, though. Why would any? And if anyone cares, like if anyone really cares, that's not my problem.
Nope.
It has nothing to do with me. And so, it's a tension. Yeah. On the one hand, what's the big deal? On the other hand, holy shit, my hair fell out. It's a duality to hold both of those things.
It is. And, man, you are in the thick of that gooey cocoon right now. It just happens to be happening, well, on both the inside and outside of you. Yeah. And kind of the common theme here, or the connection point, as it always is vulnerability, right? And gosh, I just remember being on that walk with you and having you share that with me. And you were so graceful about the way that you brought up the topic, about how you shared all of your thoughts and feelings about it. And, it felt like such a beautiful, safe space to be really open and vulnerable with each other. And that then fosters a deeper friendship and deeper relationships with the people that we love or the people that we work with. And so, that's a constant for me, is coming back to this idea of vulnerability and how we can foster more of it in this culture that so doesn't support that.
Yeah, so doesn't support that. Yeah, it really doesn't. And I think you realize when you, in any capacity in your life, when you become othered, all of a sudden I'm outside of the mainstream, like for the first time in my life. And isn't that a privilege? Honestly. I mean, it's given me such greater depth and empathy for people that our society does not embrace. It's such a narrow track that we provide for people. And I think it is the natural culmination, not culmination, because I'm halfway through my life, but at least of this section. Hopefully I'm like on life 5 of this section. It's the natural culmination, but also the birthing of like, oh my God. I mean, that was another part of it, is like, it's midlife for me. Oh my God, what am I going to do with the second half? Now that I have this knowledge, now that I have this depth of understanding and deeper compassion and understanding, that I see the world working in different way, it's become very personal, right? What does that set me up for?
Ooh, I can't wait to see. I'm so excited I get to be along on this journey with you. It's such a privilege.
Oh my goodness. You were one of the first people I thought of. I was like, oh, Chris and I are going to go for a walk, and I can't wait to talk with her about this, because you just, you hold that space for people that feels safe to be vulnerable. You show up in that way with yourself. And so that makes it, I don't know, that just makes it a really safe building block for our relationship, for all of your relationships. I think people are so lucky to get to know you.
Oh, thank you. That's really beautiful to hear. Thank you. I put on eyeliner today, Kristen.
Oh my God. Me too, but only so you can actually see where my eyes start and end.
Humor. Oh my God, it has been such a joy talking with you here today. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing so many of your lives that you've lived thus far here. And I want people to be able to find you. So tell people about your book and tell people where they can find more.
Yeah. So I have a website. It's my name, KristenCorningBedford.com. The book is on there. There's lots of places to buy it. Of course, it's on Amazon, but you can also find it in other places and order it from your local bookstore as well. Say that again.
What's it called?
What's it called? Oh, my book. Yeah. I'm like, what else? What else do you need to know about that? It's called A Generous Heart, Changing the World Through Feminist Philanthropy.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll put all of this in the show notes too, so that everybody can click through really easily and find you and find a generous heart, of which you certainly have one. So thank you again.
Thank you. So great seeing you and talking to you. Thanks for having me.